you might be able to tell that this is not Miami anymore. We had the opportunity to come up to New England. We're actually in Vermont right now to wrap up our build series. We're actually going to do the final few episodes on the road. And what's really exciting is we're actually going to go to York, Maine and visit Grain headquarters, and they're going to help us with the final few steps of the board and see how good a job I did and give us some pro tips, which is super cool. So we're at a family's house. We got the teardrop, which is always really cool that we can work on the road. And we're gonna continue on with our board building of the Grain board. So let's get right to it. We're in our makeshift Vermont workshop here, using some trash barrels for our board stand. And where we left off with the Grain board is we had built up the rail strips on both sides of the board, but we had built them a little higher than they need to be. So our goal here is, if you look closely, is we want the rail strips to be in line with this each frame, right? So every frame is a little bit different, and they provide a cool little jig here to show. This is a label jig to show you what the rail should look like. So if we're at frame number 6 right here, we can put this in, and it gives you a guide of sort of kind of what you're going for. So right now our rail strips on this side are too high, so we're going to have to throughout the length of the board work these down so they're the proper height, and make a bevel, make it flat so that it is parallel with this curve here. And it'll make sense more after we're done. To do it, I'm going to use the block plane, and we're just going to very carefully set it for a very small amount of material being taken off, and we're going to just carefully come through here and work down the rail strips until each frame is perfect height and perfect angle. After a few passes with our block plane, we were able to get the rail strips down to the point that they're parallel with each individual frame. And this is going to allow us to put the landing strips on, and they'll rest on both surfaces, both the rail strips and the frame. So we want them to be nice and parallel in line with each other. Things get a little bit trickier though as you get back, because the board gets narrower and narrower, and when we get back to the last frame here, we have to actually make what they call like a butt block, like kind of like a fairly abrupt joinery that's going to allow our landing strip to come in here and then go right up nice and smooth and have the same height as our tail block. So that's what we're going to do now. I'm just working on it with, I've got the Leatherman out. It's sort of a bit of a tricky joint to make, and we have to do one here, here, and then we also have to do it up in the nose. Just about done with the rail strips, and I wanted to illustrate what exactly I was doing. So the rail strips are going to sit like this. The outer one's going to go in the outermost position, and then we're going to have ones going in all the way up to this notch. And this is going to be the wood that the deck bonds to. So the deck's going to sit onto this surface, and then it's also going to bond to this surface. So what I want to make sure I'm doing is getting the rail beveled in such a way that it is in the same line as our frames, because we don't want this to sit any funky like that. So I've been using this little piece just to make sure it looks perfect. And then the other thing I've been checking is to make sure this surface is flat, because you don't want it to be, if it's rounded, you won't get a good bond. It'll kind of like sit on the top, but if it's nice and flat, you'll get a good bond. So that's just going around using this little piece of wood and making sure that that is achieved. And then now that we've got that done, the only other thing we're going to do is, I noticed here, as I used our little mini block plane and took material away, and in some sections it left sort of an awkward void, and you can see this is probably because I didn't do a great job with my rail stripping, but when you go from one layer of rail stripping to the next, sometimes it can leave this sort of void with a little bit of wood glue in it. And that's not really a great surface to bond your rail strip down to. So what I'm going to do is take a little bit of epoxy, and I'm going to fill in all of these little gaps. There's probably about 4 of them. And then that'll leave me a nice flush surface, nice strong flush surface to put this rail strip on. Otherwise, I'll have a hole, like an air hole underneath here, and it'll make the rail weaker. Okay, this is going to be a fairly bare bones epoxy job, because we didn't really bring the tools on this trip to do epoxy work. We do have epoxy for doing the laminate coats and stuff and doing the fiberglass work on the board, but I didn't bring any filler.
or mixing cups or any of that kind of stuff. So we're going to have to use what we have. So we cut off a piece of a Coca-Cola soda bottle we'll use for our mix. We've got the always available plastic cutlery from takeout restaurants. And what we're going to go for again here is trying to just fill these little gaps in our rail before we lay down the landing strips. We're going to need filler, which I don't have, but a good little hack is you can use the trimmings that come out of your sander. So if I come in here in my little sandbag, you'll see I have pretty fine sawdust, and this is essentially what filler is. It's just some particles to give the epoxy some structure, and so it's kind of nice, an elegant solution because it's actually filler that comes from the wood. So we're gonna come out here. We've got our epoxy. We're gonna need very little. So let's do one pump. Go with maybe, let's say we'll go with maybe 2 pumps. Maybe we'll do 3 just to be safe. So we're mixing our epoxy together, and we're going to use our fork handle here to just start adding some sawdust. And we're going to go for, we want this to be fairly thick to make it easy to kind of fill it in there. We don't want it drippy. We don't want to make a mess. We just want it to be almost like a putty that we can fill in. So you can see, there we go. The sawdust mixes in rather well. And you can even buy this sawdust as a filler product. Or if you just store, empty out your sandbag into a little bin, you can have your own supply. So we're going to need to put quite a bit more into this to get it to be thick. After emptying about the entire bag of sawdust in here, we finally got to the consistency that we need. So it looks pretty disgusting, but we're at that kind of peanut butter consistency where it's just sort of thinking about falling off the knife, but not quite. So this is going to be a nice, easy material to use to kind of fill it into those holes. It won't drip, won't make a mess, but it will fill those voids up so we don't have holes in the rail. Here we go. So I'm just going to very carefully kind of fill in these holes. And I don't want to make a mess because I don't want to have to sand all this off. So I'm going to have to come back. And of course I don't have gloves with me either. So we're really got to be careful. There we go. That's looking pretty good. And with this, you just take your time. You got a little bit of a rush because the epoxy will harden, and you can feel it with the temperature. Once it starts to get hot, it's going to kick soon. But luckily up here in Vermont, it's quite a bit cooler than it is in Miami, so we have much longer work times on each batch, which makes life quite a bit easier. This one's a little trickier because it gives an opening to a hole, so the crack's here, but you can tell that this kind of propagates back here, but the wood is thick enough here that it's not soft. So I want to try to angle this filler in so it goes back in there. And you can see some of it shooting out on the side. And this will give this void that I created structure, so hopefully it won't collapse down the road. Now I'll ask, I don't know what I did wrong to create these holes, these little voids, but when we get to grain in a couple days, we'll be sure to ask the experts and get you guys at home an explanation for how to avoid this kind of thing. I'm sure there's a technique that I missed that will prevent this from happening. These little makeshift epoxy fillets have cured, but one thing we have to do is sand off all the excess epoxy because the landing strips are going to sit on this surface, and wood glue apparently does not bond very well to epoxy. So this is what it's going to look like after the fact. I just started doing this one. We're going to sand all the epoxy off so that we have just wood,
And then you'll see this is the fillet is in that little crack, giving it some structure and strength. But we want to leave the wood bare so we can get a good wood-on-wood contact when we put the landing strips on. Installing the outermost landing strip is going to require a little bit of joinery work. So up front here we have this, I guess we call it a butt joint. And in order to get this to fit flush, we have to put a little bit of angle in our landing strip, just like that, so we can get it to fit in nice and flush. We're going to have to steam this wood and bend it so it follows the contour of the board. That's going to be quite a bit of steaming. And they recommend doing the outer landing strip in 2 parts, which is going to require a scarf joint between our 2 parts of 2 pieces of wood, roughly halfway back on the board. So we're going to do the first strip first. We're going to bend it. We're going to get it clamped down. Then we're going to work on the second strip, work our way back, gluing, gluing, gluing. And then when we get to the end here, I've left myself plenty of extra wood because I don't know exactly where I'm going to cut this yet. It's kind of hard to predict that when there's so much bending. And then we have another butt joint here. So we have 3 joints to do, and we're just going to work slowly from the nose of the board to the tail of the board. And if we work carefully and slowly, hopefully, it'll go well. Outer landing strip, check. Dark and stormy, check. Beautiful sunset, check. Wood glue, check. Iron, check. And our wet cloth to bend the wood, double check. Since this is such a big piece of wood and we're doing such a significant bend, I'm going to do a dry run first. So I'm going to pre-bend this without glue, and hopefully that will help make the gluing process easier, because I think if I try to do this all at once, I'm going to make a pretty big mess. So we're going to try, this is a new iron, I haven't used this one before. Let's see how this goes. We're going to try to bend it first and then glue it. All right, we've got steam. It's happening. All right, we're getting our steam on. Starting to get some good bend in here, and every time I get a new section that's kind of bent in, clamp it down. Woo-wee. Got some good steam going here. I've yet to burn myself, but I am concerned that I will. Let's see, look at that. All right. Hot. Let's get this rail in. Come on. You can do it. As we're doing our dry fit here, I've noticed that we've got a fairly sizable gap between our landing strip and our rail strips, which suggests that our rail strips are not as flat as I had hoped. In other sections, it's better than others, but over here, you know, that's pretty big. And what's going to happen is we're going to fill it with glue, and as we shape the board, you're going to see it. So I'm glad I did this. I think I need to take this off and sand it some more and get this surface a little flatter so that the landing strip will fit flusher. Got the first landing strip all laid up, and check out this sunset. We're putting in our second landing strip. This is the outer one we put in first, and the second one is going to go in here, and it's going to bond both to the frames and to the surface of the first landing strip. So the glue job is a little bit different, but I'm finding that putting this on is actually quite a bit easier than the first one, because there's a little bit less curvature, and we can actually bend it into shape without steaming, just with clamps. So I already did the one on the right side, and it came out great, and so we're just going to do this one on this side. It does require quite a bit of clamps because we have to clamp it down, and we also clamp it across like that. So we squeeze it this way, and then we also squeeze it this way. So you need quite a few clamps. Once this one's on, that'll be 2 landing strips on both sides. We'll need to put one more where the board is widest, and then we will be done. The third landing strip is clamped up, and I wanted to show you just sort of the approach I use. I like doing kind of an alternating clamps. The first clamp to hold it down, pushing it down onto the frame, and then the second clamp to pull it together to its neighboring landing strip, and then just alternating all the way down. I found that seems to work really well for these second and third landing strips. So these are our final clamping landing strips, and After this, we'll start doing some blocking for the fins. In the meanwhile, before I did this, I took the board out onto the lawn and traced the outline of the board onto our top panel. And now I'm gonna cut that out. And then we're not getting too far away from being able to bond the top panel onto the board, which is obviously a major step. We're gonna do that. We're gonna do that step at Grain. We're gonna head out on the road and get to Grain later this afternoon. So we're super excited to meet them. And yeah, this is coming along quite nicely and progressing quickly. We've got all 3 landing strips on. We've got the top plank shaped. So we're gonna load this into our board bag, throw it up on the roof, and head to Maine. And we're really excited to meet the guys at Grain and learn from them. I think Bowie might be more excited than anybody. You stoked? It's gonna be awesome. Time to hit the road.